Few places at the end of World War II saw more execution than Landsberg Prison. It was the very place where the future dictator who began the conflict wrote his memoirs, but at the end of the war it became a site where the Americans brought over 200 convicted war criminals to the gallows. This included former concentration camp guards, former members of the death squads that shot hundreds of thousands in Eastern Europe, and even the doctors of high-ranking members of the inner circle. After the war, Landsberg Prison remained a place of incarceration, but there were many people who were invited into the prison to witness executions, either from a press standpoint or they were political officials who had been sent to ensure that things were being performed correctly. The Americans utilised a number of wooden gallows inside of the courtyard, and the executions followed exactly the same procedure, being noted for their military efficiency. In this video we look at what it would have been like to have witnessed an execution within the walls of Landsberg Prison. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Landsberg Prison in Bavaria was a site of terror even during World War II. Before, it was a place where many experienced fortress imprisonment or confinement, a style of light imprisonment in which criminals were allowed to walk around the site, relax in their cells comfortably, write books and have visitors. It was this sort of treatment that Adolf Hitler had following his attempted coup in Munich, and he spent 264 days locked up in Landsberg, and it was there where he wrote his book Mein Kampf, which he dictated to Rudolf Hess and other Nazis who were locked up alongside him. During World War II, Landsberg took on a darker role, and it was where many foreign political prisoners were locked up and held. At least 210 inmates died due to results of the beatings and treatment administered by the guards, by their torture, and also executions that took place. It was somewhere where Hitler trusted that his greatest political prisoners or prized captives would be safe. He had experience of Landsberg firsthand, but as the end of the Second World War came, during the occupation of Germany by the Allies, Landsberg was designated as War Criminal Prison No. 1, and it was here where many convicted Nazi war criminals were locked up. The American Army military police personnel ran the site, and many who were locked up had been condemned to death at rapid trials, such as the Dachau trials, in which their crimes were heard in front of a courtroom. Now, the executions at Landsberg were not immediate. They sometimes took months, maybe even years, following the death sentence being given out, for the execution to then occur. This was due to the paperwork and numerous clemency hearings each of the defendants had. In the 5.5 years after the end of the Second World War, Landsberg Prison was the place of execution for 252 condemned war criminals. Most of them were executed by gallows, some were shot, but this was less common. The deadliest streak for executions took place in May 1946, a year after the end of the war, as 28 former Dachau concentration camp guards were sent crashing through the gallows for their torture and punishment of prisoners within a matter of days. At each execution there would be dozens of military police and guards who were there to stand witness and to ensure that each of the men met their end with some degree of dignity. The condemned would be informed a day or two before the execution took place that their time on earth was coming to an end, and they would spend this time getting their affairs in order. There were priests or chaplains appointed to help the process of preparing for death, and some of the condemned turned to God in their final days. Now, inside of the courtyard of Landsberg were a number of wooden gallows. It's debated whether 2 or 3 were used, but it's most commonly accepted that there were 2 wooden structures used for executions. These both had 13 steps on them, and led onto a platform that was fitted with a trapdoor. Above the trapdoor sat a crossbeam held up by 2 vertical pieces of wood, and the trapdoor was opened by a lever which was pushed by the executioner who stood on the platform. When the execution time came, the condemned were flanked by dozens of guards and a priest, and they were then led from their cells to the scaffold, where there were many military policemen stood around. At the bottom of the stairs, the men had their identities confirmed, and then they were helped up the stairs. Some had their arms bound behind their backs before they began the ascent onto the scaffold, and they were then, when on the platform, handed over to the executioner. American army photographers took a final morbid photograph of the men stood often over the trapdoor, and then the executioner pinioned their legs to ensure that the men did not kick when going through the trapdoor. A variety of American executioners worked at Landsberg, including the infamous botching Nuremberg hangman John C. Woods, who it is considered botched some of the executions of the former guards of Dachau on the Landsberg gallows. Now, the method of execution deployed was the standard drop, the American standard drop, and this meant that regardless of height and weight of the defendants, all of them fell roughly the same height and drop, and it was hoped that the necks would be snapped, but often this was not the case, and death would be prolonged. The executioner then secured a black hood over the condemned's head before he adjusted the noose around the neck, and then when ready, the trapdoor was sprung. The condemned then dropped through the scaffold and into the concealed structure below, and the noose would swing lightly on the crossbeam and then come to a rest. The witnesses did not see the final moments, but often heard cracks or snaps as necks were successfully snapped. Men who suffered this fate included Karl Brandt, Hitler's physician and escort doctor, a man who signed off on the planned extermination of thousands in the Action T4 euthanasia program, Karl Gebhardt, who was Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS's doctor, and who conducted barbaric experiments within concentration camps. There was also Martin Gottfried Weiss, the former commandant of Dachau, and many other war criminals. Also executed were a number of German civilians who had murdered captured American airmen or soldiers during the war. Now, as mentioned, people were brought in to witness the executions. The final set of them occurred in Landsberg within the early hours of the 7th of June 1951, before the prison was handed back over to the Germans. Those sent through the gallows included terrifying Einsatzgruppe commanders Otto Erlendorf, Paul Blobel and Werner Braun. Regarding these executions, one witness documented what happened and stated, and I quote, "Two soldiers wearing neatly pressed olive drab uniforms are first to arrive in the loft. They are followed by the chaplain, wearing a white tunic and reading from his prayer book. Behind him is Paul Blobel, whose SS unit was involved in 16 instances of mass murder, including the killing of 33,000 in a massacre alone. Then two GI guards unarmed follow. Blobel is dressed for death. He wears black shirt, black trousers, leather belt and sandals. His wrists are tied behind him. He is clean-shaven and looks older than his 57 years. I study his photograph, compare it with the man. His face is that of a storekeeper or a teacher. I look for signs of a desperate hater, the ruthless killer, but don't find any. The routine carefully prepared in advance is followed to the letter. Graham calls out, 'Attention!' All in the room stand. Warrant Officer Britt then places the prisoner on the trapdoor. He straps prisoner's ankles and steps back. The official cameraman photographs the prisoner after one of the GI assistants places a nameplate across the condemned man's chest. The GI interpreter asks, 'Have you any last words?' The prisoner replies, 'Jawohl.' 0 hours and 2 minutes. There is no wavering in voice or manner, never a sign of fear. Blobel speaks in a detached, remote voice. He says, 'Whatever I have done, I did as a soldier who obeyed orders. I have committed no crime. I will be vindicated by God and history. God have mercy on those who murder me.' A minute later, the chaplain reads a prayer. He closes with a soft Amen. Britt throws the black hood over Blobel's head. There is a slight fluff in the air pocket. Britt adjusts a noose over the man's hooded head. The rope doesn't fit correctly. Britt removes it, places it back on the man's head for a second time, tightens it with the knot at the nape of the neck. Blobel's muffled voice is heard, but what he says is a mystery to those of us in the second circle. Britt steps back, glances at Graham. Graham nods. Britt springs the trap. There is a slight crackle. The rope dangles slightly, then suddenly is very still. I recoil back into my seat. The lieutenant colonel, seated next to me, whispers, "There, but for the grace of God, go I." His pipe is fragrant. We wait. My eyes are fixed on the rope. I am quite sick now. My hands are as cold as ice. Britt is falling with the second noose. He is amazingly efficient and cold-blooded. The sergeant aide is looking into the pit where architect Blobel is hanging. How silent it has become. The sergeant pulls up the body whilst from the floor below someone disentangles the rope. We hear a murmur, then the soft voice of the medical officer. The cameraman's flash goes off in a sudden stab of light. Then there is another sound, the sound of the cover being nailed onto the coffin. After the executions had taken place, The families of the dead were asked if they would like to receive or retrieve their loved ones' bodies. Some did and then had them buried in family plots, but others, because of the shame they had brought, decided not to. Those who were not claimed were buried in a local cemetery, the Spertinger Cemetery in Landsberg. The local authorities allowed the graves to begin with to be marked with a cross, and a vaulted apex was placed above, and to begin with the names of the dead were placed on the cross, and the graves were marked with a small patch of grass and some stones. Some of those buried there included the aforementioned Paul Blobel, Hitler's Dr. Karl Brandt, Dr. Fritz Dietrich, who was executed for ordering the killing of 7 American prisoners of war, and many others who went through the gallows within Landsberg. Today these grave sites are unmarked, and the name plaques have been removed. There is documentation out there that highlights who is buried where, but the local authorities don't want the cemetery to become a place of pilgrimage with unwanted visitors attending. Landsberg Prison became a place at the end of World War II where almost 300 Nazi war criminals were brought to face their fate on the gallows or at the end of the firing squad. Within the same windows where Hitler once gazed out, 2 wooden execution platforms stood, a symbol of justice at the end of the war that he had caused and been responsible for. The executions of Landsberg were militaristic in their nature, and they were performed with ruthless efficiency at times. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.